They're reminding me that I'm between you and lunch, so I should be particularly quick and rapid. What I want to do is I want to make a comment or two about the reports, both reports, that is, about the larger project, but then take seriously the notion that what matters now, the reports are finished. So it's not time to suggest new research for the researchers, but rather to think about what is the utility and importance and how one can go forward with the two reports. The starting point, it seems to me, for both reports, though, it's really worth underlining. Here are two societies in which people were killing each other, and they had to figure out how to live together. And the reports are addressing what's the role of teachers, in particular, schools more generally, in that setting. And that's a very important starting point, and it's really worth underlining. And it's also worth saying, you all know it, but it's worth saying that teachers can't simply make up a story and hand it to learners and say, this is the way life is. Learners live life in communities, in a world, in a setting, in an environment, and they understand what's going on around them. And so the teachers can't simply make up a story and say, this is what you should believe. They have to deal with the inequality that exists. They have to deal with the conflict that exists. They have to deal with the poverty. They have to deal with whatever else it is that the learners encounter. There are, it seems to me, several really positive features in this larger project. It wrestles with some major constructs, social cohesion, obviously, but governance and several others that are important in trying to understand education in both countries. They do a good job of taking a broad view of education, not a narrow notion of what happens in schools, or not a narrow notion of what is often called school effectiveness. They take a broad view of teachers teaching and teaching in a learning setting, and what is not only going on, but what is possible. They work systematically through a large set of documents, through, as you saw a little bit in Eugene's comments, through a series of questionnaires and the responses to the questionnaires and all of that. They do a good job of drawing insights from diverse places and making the effective comparisons. On the South African side, the Eastern Cape, Western Cape is a particularly instructive sort of observation. So they do lots of good stuff. And everybody's been talking about the long reports. I've actually read both. And rather than get scared by the length of the reports, as I think it was Yusuf suggested earlier, identify the sections that are relevant to what it is you're interested in and focus on those. But what I want to concentrate my comments on is what's to follow, what's to go from here, and to be challenging a bit about the ideas and how the ideas can be used. And the starting point surely has to be the notion of social cohesion. As you read the two reports, social cohesion comes out to be, or there's a risk that it comes out to be, all the things that are good in the world and the opposite of all the things that are bad. That is, racism is bad, so social cohesion is on the other side. Inequality is bad, so social cohesion is on the other side. Conflict is bad, so social cohesion is on the other side. And there's a risk that the concept becomes empty after a while. And there's an importance of really pinning down what is the story here, what is the construct that is critical, and how it can be applied in the settings that the research was focused on. And a related part of that is to be asking not only what the teachers did or do or used to do and are now doing, but what are the learners doing that's different? That is, how do we know social cohesion when we see it? How do we know that there's been a positive consequence of these efforts to work with teachers? And the only reasonable answer is to look at what the learners are doing. It's a bit like every now and then someone will say to me, well, Prof, how was your lecture today? And I can't answer the question in that form. I can say how hard I worked. I can say that I found good examples or good background or good materials, or that I tried to be clear and articulate and all of that. But the only reasonable answer to how was my lecture is did anybody learn anything? And if there was no learning, then it was a terrible lecture, no matter how hard I worked. So the only effective measure of social cohesion is not what the teachers think about social cohesion, but about what's happened to the learners and how the learners are dealing with what it is the teachers have been doing. A second theme that's worth paying some attention to is the fascination and I think it's particularly apparent in South Africa, with the notion of policy as an official statement by somebody who is labeled a policymaker. And it seems to me that's way too narrow, far too narrow a notion of policy. Indeed, it may be a misleading sense of what policy is. Policy is about what people do and why they do it. People make public statements for all sorts of reasons that may or may not have to do with the words in the statement. Zara, after we had our conversation earlier, I was trying to think of an example, a good South African example. Here's the South African example. In 1959, there was an act called the Extension of University Education Act in South Africa. Now, what was that policy about? That was about segregating higher education. The real policy there was not about extending higher education. It was about segregating higher education. It was especially about pushing those few black students who managed to get into white institutions out. And so we get confused if we take the policy to be what the words say. There are words offered to us by policy makers. People are officially designated as policy makers regularly. And it seems to me to be useful to carry this idea further, we need a much richer notion of policy, and particularly a notion of policy that is made at the bottom, not at the top. That is, particularly a notion of the ways in which policy is made by teachers, by schools, by students, by learners, by communities. And that's worth a good deal of attention. Third, it seems to me, and here I'll offer yet another little bit of an example. I teach in the United States, and I periodically get South African students in my class. And one of the really striking observations to make is how often it is that students who've been studying apartheid every year in their curriculum from, when does it start? About grade 4 or 5 when they, somebody help me out. When is it an official unit? When they have to be talking about apartheid? 4. Okay, so been studying from grade 4 about apartheid, and they end up now, having completed matric, come to the university with a very shallow, superficial understanding of apartheid. Well, there were bad guys and there were good guys, and some were this color and some were that color, and we know a few of the heroes and a few of the enemies. But why would a society engage in this complex and labyrinthine set of rules to implement all this? They're really not able well to analyze that. So a third comment about these two projects is that I didn't see terribly much, and I want to look forward, not backward, that there still is work to be done in thinking about how to teach about apartheid in South Africa and about the genocide in Rwanda, and that itself is a part of making social cohesion a tool of the future rather than simply an observation about the past. There was a tantalizing fourth comment, tantalizing little hint in Yusuf Sayed's comments at the beginning of the session, in which he compared the more centralized governance scheme in Rwanda with a more distributed, decentralized governance scheme in education in South Africa. And there's a powerful, powerful set of insights that must come out of that. It was picked up a bit later by the comment about the school governing boards that serve as a kind of guardians of resistance to transformation. That needs a whole lot more attention. That is, the process of making decisions about education, and where does the locus of authority lie, and under what circumstances does it make sense for more centralization to be the preferred way of doing things? Under what circumstances does it make sense to have more decentralized rather than more centralized? And asking always who benefits. In whose interest is this way of doing things, and why does it persist in that way? Fourth, like many reports, the two reports end with a series of recommendations, and I always find that a little bit frustrating because they're recommendations to the people who are doing the things that are the opposite of what the recommendations say they should be doing. And so why then make the recommendations? That is, the power of the report is an analysis of education systems and what they're not doing well. And it's not so useful in the end to simply gather that all together and say, here's what you should be doing better. Much more important is to use the analysis to figure out why it is that people persist in doing the things that the analysis says is problematic. Why is it that decisions keep being made in ways that disempower teachers, for example? Why is it that decisions get made in going down paths that make it more likely that there will be conflict and inequality and the opposites of social cohesion, rather than simply announcing recommendations? So what that leads me to as a kind of final comment real quickly is that it seems to me that the most powerful strategy for taking forward what has been done is to, in some sense, go back to the starting point, that is, to go back to the teachers and find ways to enable the teachers to be the bearers of the analysis and its findings, to find ways for the teachers to be the recommenders, that is, the teachers to be at the center of dealing with what it is that needs to change, in large part in dealing with other teachers. Not so much sending the teachers to Pretoria to talk to the government, or to Kigali to talk to the government, but enabling teachers to work with other teachers to make their circumstances different, and thereby to make the outcome, the social cohesion outcome that was the intent of the study, something that can be achieved rather than simply a tool of analysis. Thank you. I'll quit now.
Right. I think we can show more applause again. Appreciate both of them. We'll use a few minutes to take questions for the speakers. Professor Ndabaga. Got one here, and then that will be second, and then the heads there.
Thank you very much, and thank you both for very interesting inputs. Professor, my question is to you around what happened post-94. In terms of my understanding, and I could be wrong, that teachers, along with other professionals, had been targeted at the beginning of the genocide, which would have then meant that post-genocide, that would have been an area which needed to be filled. And if that is the case, how did the government and the education authorities go about trying to promote reconciliation and transformation in a situation where you had just come from this massive trauma? Thank you.
Yeah, but I'm before, I'm the after that. Okay, standing over. Thank you. I think it's age before beauty. Thank you very much to both speakers. Professor, my question is around 20-odd years post 1994. In terms of the policy that you've explained to us and the focus of the government, you know, do you see a difference in society? Because it's, you know, because you're talking about a generation who has gone through their whole schooling. How has that did that have an impact on the larger society? You know, and of course there are different perspectives about Rwanda, but having been in your country last year, the one thing that struck me was the fact that it's you know, it's a country that seemed to have gone back to basics. And I think maybe it's something you want to comment on. You know, what are some of the things that were implemented in order to bring about this cohesion that you intend?
My question is very short. What is the level of inequality and what percentage exists currently in terms of the two streams you were talking about?
We'll take this one, the last one.
Okay. As having been involved in setting up the Quaker Peace Centre 35 years ago and now going through a whole re-envisaging for the future, what is the most important lesson or the most important thing that you think made the most difference in Rwanda?
I don't see any more hands, so I'll ask Professor to respond.
Thank you very much for these wonderful questions. First, the question one is all about professionals who are targeted, and of course different people, and then how the governments try to reconciliate in the midst of all these things. First of all, that's why I said we got excited when Professor Yusuf approached us to work with South Africa, because we are coming more or less from the same history, even the period actually, 1994. So we have a lot in common. And because of that, we try to benchmark or to put our experiences and see sort of comparative education. Now, in Rwanda, how the governments try to reconciliate, first of all, is by ignoring what happened. They are saying whatever happened, except a direct crime whereby someone said you killed so and so, and there is evidence, there you can go to the court. Then, number two, when it comes, what happened to Rwanda is unique in the whole world. Probably in terms of the people who died, they may not be more than, the Holocaust and other places. But the thing is, the period within which it was done, it was too short. And the methodology used to kill each other was so crude and cruel. Number three, whereby a father could kill a son because the son resembles the mother. Just because you married a Hutu, you have two sons, so if you go to the side of the mother, so you are killed. Where a religious so-called person kills a fellow priest, a fellow nun. So the methodology makes Rwanda case unique. So the country is saying, whatever happened, ignore. Number three, because of whatever happened, we cannot be able to judge everybody. Let us use now, which, if there are some lawyers here, the popular known Gacaca court. That's a traditional court whereby whoever is talked about to have committed any crime, whether rape, real killing, destroy people's property, is taken to the village, however remote it is, whether you're a minister, whether a general, or it has never happened anywhere, where a general, full general, goes to the remotest place where he was born to face the local court. And you are asked, why did you do that? And where did you put one of our generals, a full general, was put in front of very old men who don't know even how to write. And they asked him, where did you take the 8 boys you put in your vehicle? We saw you around this time. And the guy collapsed. So that kind of process gives courage and hope to the people that at least something is being done. That's another reconciliation. Now, our National Unity and the Reconciliation Commission is not just advocating forgiveness, whatever, but it uses these practical methodologies to make sure that people reconcile. Actually, it's in that heading that the local court, there's one cow per child, Papua family, eliminating or eradicating grass-thatched houses for the orphans, for the widows, and so forth, as sort of practical way of make sure that people reconcile. So those are some of the reconciliation process. Also, I talked about the one identity, the sameness of Rwandans, as opposed to unity and diversity. We said, why should you call yourself Tutsi when you are all Rwandans? Other reconciliation, there are some of us, of our colleagues at the university who tell us, I did not know that one day I would go to the university because I was told that region, there came a time when the issue of Hutu-Tutsi was reduced a bit. In other words, Tutsis were not human beings. It came now to the regional problems. But some regions could not go to the university. So now the university education, actually, the whole university is open to everybody. So people feel, hey, I didn't know that these guys can do anything good in their lives. So all those kind of practical approaches try to make reconciliation practical. The second question is, if there's any difference in the society. Yes, there is. I don't know, I'm not a politician, but if you look around, schools, again, I go back to the issue of schools, meritocracy. Everybody joining the school at a time, different universities. Rwanda had one university. Now we had about 29 universities. Now everybody can, any younger person, even adult, can join the university openly. Politics. Now the present constitution, as I say, I'm not a politician, I'm giving you the findings. The constitution is very clear. If you win the elections, party A, it's not the other or the other that the winner takes store. The constitution is very clear. You share with those ones who lost. Again, another way, it's a trial, it's not a guarantee, but it tries to say, hey, we are still serving the same nation. Now, those are some of the basics somebody can depend on, say, there is a difference. And lastly, in terms of the inequality percentage-wise, it's difficult to tell. Unless we go to another research, as Professor Joe was saying, that one research gives the birth to another, we can go to pure quantitative and find out the percentage-wise. Then, again, those I've mentioned above answer the last question. The most things that have made the biggest difference. The school system, meritocracy, politics, constitution, national unity and reconciliation approaches, all those, you see, they have made a very big difference because it's telling people, in spite of whatever happened, we can still live together. Thank you.
Questions for either speaker?
I'd like to ask them a question, and they're unfair. The question for Joel is that, right, you clearly don't want to talk to people you say are responsible for the very things that you say you don't want to talk to them. Right, you said you don't want to make recommendations, right? But they are in positions of power. They do make decisions, and if you had to tell them something, what is it that you could tell them? Eugene, your story is great, and it seems like a good model of social cohesion. The question is, what's wrong with it? And what are the problems with it? Are there no problems with it? Do people willingly give up half an hour without any sense of dissatisfaction to be socially bonded? In other words, what's wrong in your narrative? Or is there nothing wrong with the one there?
I didn't see any other hands, so suppose it's up to the speakers now.
Okay, definitely. That's why when I was giving my few slides, the only problem we are rushing, I capitalized on the red part. There are so many things that are not working out. Yes. That's why when you go to the structure of social cohesion, still you have a big gap or a big mile to run in terms of inequality, as my brother was asking about the percentages, which I could not answer. Up to now, much as a lot has been done, but still they're saying, take an example of decentralization, whereby the aim is to make sure that the local people own the decision in terms of schools and other things. But still, the central government, you see that indirectly takes power. In other words, the decentralized system remains sort of just a shadow. So in the end, the people don't see that power which they were told that we are giving you power. So that kind of pretense does not give people strong hope that really we can solve our problems. Schools, much as I talk about meritocracy, education for all, it's a good thing, but came with many problems. Poor schools became even poorer because the numbers doubled. So that implies lack of infrastructure, lack of teaching materials. So much as the social cohesion is being tackled, but there are so many loopholes that are still within the structure of make sure that there's really a social cohesion. Again, also what's wrong with our narrative. The question of oneness, again, is questionable. Human as we are, when His Excellency, my president, went to Netherlands, one guy had just finished his PhD in Rwanda and said, to me, you are denying me what I want. I want to be called a Hutu, so what's wrong with that? There are people who argue like that. That's what I want. So you are discriminating me in a way. So all that kind of stuff can be seen as still some problems.
You know, Yusuf, I certainly don't want to be heard as saying that it's not important to try to use research to influence policy. What I am saying is, first of all, it doesn't work that way. That is, it doesn't work that simply researchers announce a result, and as a consequence of announcing the result, clever policymakers take in that result and then behave differently. I mean, think about it. Which minister in the world, education minister in the world, wakes up in the morning and says, what shall I do this morning? Let me take down this 500-page research report and read that for a while. Right? That's not how education ministries work, and that's not how departments of education work. And so we need a much clearer sense of how it is that research enters into the policy process. And so what I was challenging was the notion of ending a research project with a list of to-dos. And here's the list of to-dos, and somehow or other we're going to send that list of to-dos to people who make decisions, and that will complete our obligation. I was arguing for, suggesting a much richer notion of how research can enter the policy process. And part of what I was suggesting was that in this case, that it can enter the policy process through the teachers, not researchers announcing things to people in authority, but helping teachers themselves articulate a notion of social cohesion, helping teachers demonstrate a notion of social cohesion, and most important, helping teachers be the ones to demonstrate the obstacles, the impediments, what's preventing them from achieving what it is the policymakers say they would like to achieve. And it seems to me that's a much more powerful force in trying to get movement among people who need to make decisions. So what I was arguing for is not making recommendations, but rather the notion that making recommendations as a list of what is to be done and simply posting it on or tacking it to a notice board somewhere or even putting it in Twitter as a strategy for changing policy. And arguing instead that in this case, I think there is a very powerful path. And the path is the teachers you've been working with over several years now. And for all of the complications that involves, and for all of the conflicts among teachers, and all of the divergence in institutions that seek to represent teachers and organize teachers, nonetheless, there needs to be some other path than simply announcing to people in power, here's what's a good way to behave. Thank you.